Well Tempered, your wellbeing podcast with Daniel Home.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Well Tempered. My name is Daniel Home and I'm excited to be sharing this with you. This is a project I've been working on for months and I'm very glad I've got a fantastic episode for you, fantastic interview guests, fantastic topics. But to start, you probably want to know who I am and what I do and what all of this is about. So let's start right in. My name's Daniel. I'm a euphonium student from Germany who's studying at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester. I'm now in my third and final year, but all the time I've been here, I've been, kind of exploring life and trying to find my way, what probably most music students do. Most students, just people in general. I'm very interested in people and what they do, what they think, the philosophy side of things, and having a good life. What does that mean? How do we achieve it? Big questions, and they're at the beginning, at the start of all of this. Now, as probably every student knows, moving out of home, going to college is a huge step in life, and it comes along with a lot of struggles and challenges. And of course, we do all tackle those earlier or later. But the question of how we live and how we're happy and healthy is so fundamental to life that I've been thinking about that for years now. And that's basically what this podcast is about. It's about sharing my thoughts, exploring the research of health and well-being, and connecting that to the everyday life we have as music students. Now, you probably want to know more about me. I'm a euphonium student. That's an instrument that's quite common in the UK, not so much in Germany though. It's a low brass instrument that looks like a small tuba, and it plays mainly in brass bands, and I'm very lucky to be a euphonium player for the Hammonds band based in Huddersfield in Yorkshire. So that's kind of the big music chunk of my life. And what brought me kind of on the way of health and well-being was quite a negative experience I made just over 2 years ago now. It was a mid-year recess, a week of holidays we get at college, and I woke up with a terrible headache. Now, you might say that might happen to a lot of people, but the special thing about my headache was that it didn't go away, and it didn't do that for half a year. That was a condition that was later diagnosed as being new daily persistent headache. That's exactly what that is. And we don't have to go too much into the medical details, but what it meant to me was a lot of, pain, fatigue, and that's what I was struggling with because it just impacted so many areas of my life, my playing, my well-being, and so on. And that was kind of the first realization for me that health is so connected to all we do. So the health bit, the well-being bit, we have obviously mental well-being, physical well-being, and that was all kind of big area for me to explore, especially the impact stress had on my life, which led to fatigue and a lot of time management I had to learn, but that all came alongside with exploration of well-being research, and that was what made a big change to my life, a huge change. And this podcast is about all of this. How do we live a life that's enjoyable, a life that's productive, a life that we're happy with? And that's what is at the core of health and well-being. Now, the structure of this podcast is that we mainly feature interviews with experts and also students who share their experiences. And for this episode, we've got the fantastic interview guest of Sara Ascenso, who's a lecturer here at the RNCM, and she researches all of this stuff and she knows about it. So she's going to explain it in much more detail and precision than I can. Another framework we use for the podcast is the PERMA model of well-being that was developed by Martin Seligman, an American psychologist we're going to talk about later. And PERMA stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And we'll explore this later in much more detail, but we have PERMA letters of the month to kind of have spotlight on different areas of our well-being. And for this, the first episode, the letter is P, positive emotions. That's what most of the interview will focus on. And let's start right in with the interview. It's now my pleasure to welcome Sara Ascenso to the podcast. Sara is really the perfect match for what I'm doing. She studied piano performance, but she's also a clinical psychologist, and she's getting a PhD on musicians' health and well-being, and is now lecturing at the RNCM and at Trinity Laban in London, and is a visiting lecturer at a couple of other universities. Welcome, Sara. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Daniel. Such a joy to be here.
Because we're a music podcast, I'm gonna start right in with a piece of music. I ask you to bring a piece of music with you. What is it?
Yes, it was so difficult to choose one, but I chose Max Bruch's 8 pieces for clarinet, viola, and piano. Because they bring so many great memories, and I absolutely love them. So my favorites are number 3, number 6, number 7, and number 8. But I would suggest maybe we can listen to number 8.
Actually, there's a bit of a copyright issue here, so if that's okay, we're going to listen to number 3 instead, recorded by Ben Redwine, Betty Hook, and Carl Bunner, published by Washington Musica Viva, and that's the CC BY NC ND 4.0 license we're using also for the one later. Enjoy. Lovely. And I'll include the whole movement later in the podcast for you to listen to. So, Sara, for my listeners to get to know you a bit better, well, we already covered what you studied, but where did you study, and what were your biggest challenges as a student?
Great. So I started my student journey in Lisbon, Portugal. I then came to the UK for my master's and my PhD. So I started, going back to early childhood, I started learning music from a very young age. And then when I was in college, I fell in love with psychology. So I ended up doing psychology, but continuing my music studies, and I ended up doing music, especially piano, as well at higher education. So part of my challenges were actually juggling these two areas, and part of the joy as well and the beauty, I think, of my student journey. But it's quite an intense program, as you know, a Bachelor of Music, and a psychology program is actually quite intense as well. So having to juggle those two, yeah, was challenging. Time management and all those things that we talk about with you guys. And also I think one of my characteristics, which I think in a way is a strength, but sometimes can be a bit of a challenge, is curiosity. So I'm quite curious, and so because of these two very different areas happening at the same time in my life, I started getting really curious about lots of different things, but then sometimes it was hard to actually focus on, say if I was writing a dissertation or whatever, just focusing on that very narrow sort of topic. And so I would get lost and read a lot of stuff, but then, yeah, sometimes you just need to focus. So I would say, yeah, juggling, time management, and actually getting lost in many fascinating topics were my main my main challenges, but a lot of great things from those challenges emerged as well. So
Fantastic. I think if you study in a conservatory, you sometimes get the feeling that there's nothing else other than music that interests people. So good to hear that it's normal to be interested in more stuff. I certainly am. So you then
what are
did,
you interested in, Daniel?
well, I'm interested in a lot of things, but mainly the kind of maths and physics side of
Nice.
um, logic, how the world works. That really fascinates me. Also, politics. That's just, yeah.
Great.
I
Great.
also sometimes
I
don't
thought I
know.
was hoping you would say psychology, but that's okay.
Oh,
No, just kidding.
well, I'm certainly interested in psychology, otherwise I wouldn't do this.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Um, well, you you then went and did your PhD on musicians' health and well-being, which is a fascinating topic. How did you come to that, and what influenced you?
Mm. Yeah, so um well, first of all, my life itself was happening in a very odd way. So when I graduated um, from both areas, I started working both as a musician and as a psychologist. So my typical week would be split in two. And so on the first part of my week, I was a clinical psychologist and I was implementing interventions for all kinds of clinical scenarios. And that actually required daily contact with recent literature, research, and as a side effect, I began to know more about how music-based initiatives were being used in clinical contexts to promote well-being. And I got really intrigued about this. And also generally my colleagues in psychology would say, oh, you're so lucky you get to do music, and that's such a great tool for well-being. But at the same time, on the second part of my week, when I was a pianist, I was working as a piano teacher in a conservatoire and also as a piano accompanist. um, I started to notice, oh, and I also had performances, so with the chamber group, and I started to notice how many musicians actually struggled to maintain a healthy and balanced life. And so it was quite intriguing to me how our profession had such potential for promoting positive change in well-being, but also it seemed to pose such a threat at the same time. So this got me curious. I began very interested in both sides of this equation. So how can music promote well-being? How can psychology help musicians? So that's what ultimately brought me to the UK, to the Centre for Performance Science at the Royal College of Music, where I started my research in this field. So first I did an MSc in performance science looking at this, and then I moved on to my PhD. But also very early on in my psychology training, I had some seeds planted in my heart on positive psychology. And it's interesting that initially I was quite critical. Well, I'm still critical around well, many aspects of that line of research. But I was quite it was hard for me to start really taking it seriously, as in positive psychology seriously. But then this interest grew a lot, and I ended up also doing a summer school in Oslo on positive psychology, and all of this sort of yeah, grew in such a natural sort of organic way that then at the right time when I was doing my PhD, it was the obvious choice to bring in positive psychology as well. So yeah, so I would say all these influences, my daily life, both in the conservatoire as a musician doing lots of different things and concerts and things, and as a psychologist, but also my own training in psychology and positive psychology, everything sort of collided. And yeah, and that it led me to my PhD journey.
That's fantastic. Interesting how different things can come together in the end. And um, I find it quite confusing sometimes when you have that kind of idea. Music is great for your well-being until you study it. So sometimes hear that. And well, it's good that you do some academic research on it. Um, I, I'm just wondering, you talked about your everyday life a couple of years ago. What does it look like now? I know you're lecturing at a couple of conservatoires.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a fruit salad as it always has been, which I enjoy. So I'm lecturing at the RNCM, as you know, and that's most of my week. And I'm also doing research. I'm supervising students. And these past 4 years, part of what I do at the RNCM was also building new modules, new research electives, and so forth. So that's one component of my week. Then I work at Trinity Laban in London, Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance. And there, what I do is slightly different. So I'm in charge of one elective as well, performance psychology. But most of my time there is as a learning support advisor. And what I do is it's not the typical learning support role that you would see in higher education, where you work with students with learning differences. This is a little more than that. We also work with students with learning differences. So if there's a musician, you know, having challenges around their journey because of their dyslexia or dyspraxia or so forth, we use one-to-one and group interventions to help with that. But we also develop any type of intervention that students might need at any point to optimize their learning. So if there's a pianist who's having a concert in a month's time, who's struggling to memorize their concerto, they come work with me and I'll help them understand how the brain memorizes, having strategies to memorize, all of that. Or we've had students with what we call musical dyslexia, which is when they don't struggle with dyslexia, but they struggle with musical dyslexia. So dyslexia just for musical notation. So we work with them for that. Or someone who's really struggling to memorize their text of their aria because it's in a different language and so forth. So all sorts of things, anything that could help optimize students' learning comes to us. And so that's basically what I do. So it's very it's very different every week. And then yeah, and then on top of that, I get to visit lecture in different places as well. So it's always yeah, it's always very different. Each month is different on that front. But yeah, that's basically what I do at the moment.
That's great. Yeah. Where do you actually live?
I live in London.
In London. Great. So,
Yeah.
well, it's quite a way up to Manchester, but you do it every week. Fantastic.
Yeah, I
Um,
love Avanti trains.
uh, just to add some context to that, you were actually the first lecturer on musicians' health and well-being we had in the UK. So your appointment at the RNCM was a very special thing, which we're grateful for. And for all those people who are listening who may not have studied at the RNCM and don't know, maybe even the RNCM student who don't know what's special about the program, yeah, what is kind of new with you being here?
Hmm. Yeah, so I would say, well, maybe we can talk about how it all sort of um started.
Yeah,
We were already doing a lot of work in this area before I joined. Um, but I think what is new is that we are trying now to embed this more and more in the natural fabric of the RNCM and in the curriculum. So this type of content and experience of well-being activities is not something we bring as an add-on, as a sort of cherry on top of the cake, but it's part of the core curriculum, and that's in a consistent way. This was the first time that that happened. So at the moment we have well-being content across every single year of the BMAS program. Um, so yeah, so that's it. So I think an important thing for us is that when we talk about well-being, we don't talk about a parallel agenda that happens side by side with your learning and performance agenda. We know that students who invest in their well-being, they're going to learn better, they're going to perform better, they're going to adapt better to challenges and adversities and bounce back from them much better. They're going to have more sustainable careers. So the agenda is the same. And so I think that's quite obvious in the way we work. We try to embed as much as we can and to make it part of the everyday um, of your life as a student, rather than just bringing some extra sort of session here and there. Um, yeah, it's funny that I don't know if I share this in one of our lectures in your module. I think so, that many years ago there was a very interesting news piece in the New York Times about a high-profile conservatoire in the US, where the journalist was trying to see what happened to the graduates 10 years later after they graduated. So they were trying to contact everyone to see what they were doing, mapping out what happened in their journeys and all of that. And they found out that 1/3 could not be traced, meaning that they're probably not doing music. 1/3 was doing music, and then 1/3 could be traced but were not doing music. And when they interviewed them, they found out that they thought the conservatoire prepared them technically and musically, but not psychologically for the profession, for the sector. So they didn't feel holistically prepared, and a lot of them were sharing around challenges around sustaining mental health and so forth. So I found it a fascinating piece of work because it really brought this well, it reinforced this idea that we are here to make sure that you guys are holistically ready and prepared for our sector, for this profession. And so we have that duty to really provide that preparation. And so that's what we try to do.
great, fantastic to see you so passionate about it, and I think it's very obvious why it matters to us as students. I mean, first of all, we can't escape it here at the RNCM. And if I'm just talking about my own experience, I had the artistic development 1 and 2 lectures that kind of just gave a taster and awareness of research in well-being exists and can help us. And now this year, I had a research elective on musicians' health and well-being that went into much more depth, definitely. It was still quite short, but gave me a bunch of studies to look at and interesting research. And I think what it really does, if you properly think about it, is your kind of perception of how health and well-being works changes, and that's something that I found really, really useful.
I'm really glad that you said it was short because it was actually 10 weeks, but it's good that it felt short. That's a good indicator.
Well, I mean, 10 weeks are nothing. That if you, especially the last 4, 5 months for me went over
Yeah, time
like
flies when,
nothing.
yeah, yeah. No, but I'm really encouraged that you feel like it was short. Yeah, I felt the same. I felt we could go on for ages and we would have lots of other great topics to talk about.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. Um, yes, great. That kind of leads me to the next topic of our conversation. You mentioned positive psychology earlier, which is a kind of area of psychology that tries to focus on the positive sides of psychology and not just looking at what's going wrong. And that also works in a much broader way if we look at health and perceptions of health.
Mm,
Um, and the kind of starting point to look at that, it always is the World Health Organization's definition of health, which was quite surprising for me, certainly, because it says,
interesting. Why was it surprising for you, Daniel?
let me just read it out
Okay,
so
yeah.
everyone knows what it is. It says, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. From 1948, so it's quite old actually. Um, yeah, why does it surprise me? Probably because you kind of have that idea of something goes wrong, you break your leg or something, you go to the doctor, they fix it, and then you're fine again.
Mm,
So kind of health is the zero line, and then you may drop, and then you
mm,
come back. Um, but I mean, talking of a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being um, is 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 very much on the positive side.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So the construct of health is a positive one if we think about the word health.
Yeah.
But intriguingly, when we use when we use the expression physical health, we think about a positive state. When we use the expression mental health, for example, we automatically connotate it negatively. We associate it with disorder or negative status, not with health. It's really, really interesting. I think this has to do a little bit with um, the growing professionalization of psychiatry and psychology, drawing from the medical model. So this idea of we need to assess, categorize disorder in order to address pathology and illness. And yeah, if we go back a bit, the medical model has been this framework that has guided clinical psychology since its beginning, really, and indeed well-being studies initially and with musicians as well until very recently. So say, for example, Daniel, if you have some sort of complaint, uh, like a persistent cough, for example, you visit your GP, they prescribe you something for your symptoms. A few weeks later, the symptoms are gone. You'd probably think, oh, there we go. No symptoms. I'm healthy. But actually, what this definition is suggesting to us is that we're not really aiming for the absence of disorder, for the absence of pathology, but we're aiming for much more than that. We're aiming for positive indicators of functioning. But this whole tendency for the medical model is a little ingrained. I think it helped a lot. It helped with communication between people, and it helped us have a little more of a systematized way of, classifying mental illness and leading to a bit more of a uniformed practice and ways of addressing things. Um, but I think one of the downsides of that is that then we tend to to reduce people to the sum of their problems, and all we aim at is the 0 point or the survival point of the no symptoms kind of point. And also another thing that we also discussed in our module is that when we have that idea, we tend to see mental health and mental illness in a very simplistic way, in a slightly binary way. You're either healthy or you're ill. And we know that that health and mental health specifically is multidimensional. There are different dimensions. I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that too, but that's also quite an important implication of this.
Yeah, certainly. And especially mental health that has such a negative image. Um, let me counter that with the World Health Organization's definition of mental health, because it
Good.
reads really, really fantastic.
Mm,
It says, mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community.
mm.
Wow, it's like, if you can do all of that, you have a fantastic life, don't you?
Yeah, I actually have a bit of a critical view on that one, but I think it's also around the language used, because I'm thinking, someone with chronic illness, for example, um, they might be mentally healthy, and still struggle to contribute to their community in some ways. So, yeah, I always wondered about the operationalization of that section of the definition. What does that actually mean? But yeah, anyway, let's let's not complicate. But yeah, I think it's very, very important to look at this in this multi-dimensional way. And also when we when we have a classification of mental functioning that's very categorical, sometimes we can encourage an inaccurate assumption that we are able to discern normal from abnormal behavior in this absolute form, and that mental disorders are sort of differentiated from normal functioning and from each other. And actually, it's a little more complex than that. Sometimes we can get a little simplistic, but what we now understand is that mental health and mental illness, they are part of two different continua, and we can be mentally healthy in some components and mentally ill in other components at the same time. So mental health and illness can actually coexist. For example, a person experiencing depressive mood can be at the same time flourishing in other areas, such as, for example, positive relationships. So psychological models have now geared towards a much less simplistic view of functioning, and assume that, yeah, mental health and illness can actually coexist. It's like a complex set of patterns within the same individual. And this helps a lot in many ways. And also, I think it reduces the stigma around mental ill health. So, so yeah, and I was also thinking, the world of music is filled with very open and generous accounts of this dynamic. For example, biographies of eminent composers. We see this all the time, where people are sharing about diagnosis of all kinds of things, and at the same time, you have evidence of how they are flourishing in so many other components of functioning. And so so yeah, I think it's quite encouraging to have this more sort of nuanced way of looking at these things.
Yeah, I think the one thing to take away, if there was this, there's not the health is not the zero line. It's something that's very positive, and that describes your kind of flourishing and well-being
Mm,
as a person. And I think it also gives you a much more helpful view on your own health, because if something happens, you're not just waiting for recovery. It gives you tools in your hand you can use to increase your well-being. And for example, when I had my headache disorder,
mhm.
which was awful, I can tell you,
Sorry to hear.
um, and there's not much you can do about it. It's just useful to know that your general well-being and lifestyle are not dependent on whatever health issue you have at the
Mm,
moment.
yeah, exactly. You won't define yourself just based on that. And there's so much more that you can invest in as well. Yeah, I think it's really good to, because this has practical applications for us. How does this change our day to day? If we know that health is more than the absence of ill health, what difference does this actually make for us? And I think it really brings the question, what are we giving attention to? Are we just, you know, are we just surviving and trying to sort of minimize harm and just going on that survival level that we talked about? Or are we actually investing in our flourishing? What are we giving attention to? For us to flourish, we really need to invest in planting and watering and nourishing the best in us, those things that make us live to the full of our potential. And as the definition was saying, to live productive and fulfilling lives. So investing in our well-being is trying to look at those elements that we know will lead to that fulfilling life and being intentional about nourishing them. And actually investing in our well-being in this way also protects us from ill health and illness. So it's a win-win, really. But if we aim for merely average or for merely survival, we will remain merely average and merely survival. So we need to aim for that flourishing. And yeah, but there are also decisions here. There's a really lovely metaphor that a lot of people use in positive psychology of the garden. If you want to plant a garden, what do you do? And first, of course, you clean your soil, you prepare your soil, but then you have to obviously choose what you want to plant, and where to plant what. And some plants will be very wisely planted next to each other and so forth. And so that's what well-being models have brought us, is this wisdom about what to plant, what to invest in, and how to water that and how to nourish that. So yeah, I think it's great. Do you have any sort of well-being elements that you brought from the well-being modules that you'd like to intentionally plant and nourish in your life, Daniel?
Yeah, definitely. The biggest one is gratitude, and I think we're going to talk about gratitude later when we talk about positive emotions.
Oh, definitely.
Um,
Okay, well
but
done.
that's it's just a fantastic thing to look at. And I think what which really just talked about is kind of what is health, what is mental health,
Mm,
and the kind of perception we have of it is very um, important, because all which is talked about has to do with how we see health.
mm,
And if you're listening to this and you say the World Health Organization's definitions are very new and surprising to me, maybe talk to your friends about it, maybe someone with a long-term illness, because
mm,
they will probably have a very different view of health.
mm, mm. Yeah, I'm so grateful you shared about your own experience, because yeah, that's quite strong, isn't it? So this idea for you as well, that even though you had that condition going on, you could still be flourishing and be well at the same time.
Yeah, and some of my best memories from that time are from days when I felt awful,
Mm,
but at the same time, you can just experience so much gratitude, other different
mm,
emotions.
mm.
Um,
It's great.
I, I remember a day, I don't know when it was in late autumn last year, and I don't know what happened, but the sun was warm and the trees looked really nice, and I just felt really free
Yeah, yeah.
and really weird. And it was just such a positive experience. I still remember it.
But it's lovely that you actually intentionally allow space and time for that to happen, to notice that. So you notice the goodness, right? Because sometimes we get into this mode of just reacting to what's happening to us, but we don't intentionally open that space to actually notice the good. So I'm really glad that you did that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm very happy it happened.
Yeah.
Um, I think what we just saw is that the terms positive, like positive health, positive psychology,
Mm.
are a bit weird and confusing because health and psychology very positive con concepts basically.
Y-
Um, so
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Why would we have to add the word positive to a construct such as health, right? Because health is, in its nature, is positive. But I think it happened because, especially uh, through, well, especially in the case of psychology, it happened because there was such a tendency to look at what doesn't work in us that researchers had to sort of call our attention to, to this. Please notice what works. So Martin Seligman, which was one of the big pioneers in positive psychology, when he was appointed president of the American Psychological Association, it was really interesting because he sort of had this little exercise where he was checking what psychologists are studying, what are they giving attention to. So he did a little review of papers. I think it was between 1967 and the year 2000 or something like that. And he just wanted to understand, what are we studying really? And he found he found a ratio of 21-1 in terms of the negatively oriented papers around things like depression, anxiety, anger, and so forth, and positively oriented papers around, joy, satisfaction, happiness. So 21-1. So we were really, according to him, we were basically just focusing on half of our jurisdiction as psychologists and researchers, which is, the dark side of human experience. And he was saying, well, if psychology is about understanding human experience and human behavior in its totality, we need to balance the field. So yeah, the whole positive health and positive mental health is almost like, hello, please, can we look at the positive side of things? But yeah, I agree. It's a little weird to have to add the positive to a construct such as health. But I guess it's just signaling that it was so imbalanced as a field that we had to sort of try to call the attention towards that. And yeah.
yeah, yeah, thank you. I think Martin Seligman is certainly one of the names to know because he really brought the public attention to that field. He was appointed. I didn't know if you mentioned he was the president of the American Psychological Association, kind of the most eminent psychologist at that time
Mm-hmm.
in terms of representation. And he kind of made that more public, which is very important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But he's obviously not the only one who does research in positive psychology. It's a field that's been growing, and there are lots of fascinating aspects of it. your research, of course, for the musicians side. What would you say fascinates you most in kind of research, maybe recent research in positive psychology?
Hmm. Well, there's so much that fascinates me. I think this is constantly changing. If you had asked me this question 6 months ago, I'd probably said different things. At at the moment, one thing I've been thinking a lot about is around what we are actually talking about around these models of mental health and mental ill health. Um, so in the core sort of positive psychology literature, a body of work that has been very influential to me and to my work is the work of Corey Keyes. Corey Keyes is an American sociologist and psychologist. He's based at Emory University, and he has really helped develop a model of mental health and illness that, as we were talking about earlier, places both in separate continua rather than seeing them as an end of the same continuum. So from this perspective, someone may be, for example, experiencing poor mental health, i.e., not living within an optimal range of human functioning, or in other words, not flourishing, while also staying free from mental illness. And conversely, some individuals may meet clinical criteria for mental disorder and at the same time experience high levels of positive functioning indicators. And this has been receiving, well, for a long time now, very solid empirical validation. And so I'm very interested in all this because I've done a study with musicians, with a very large sample of musicians, that I'm currently writing up about, where I assessed mental health and mental illness at the same time, and I could verify this model within my own data, and so it's been fascinating to see. But also, Corey Keyes has a very recently launched book as well, so I've been sort of, yeah. I've been very excited to get to know more of his stuff. But at the same time, one thing I'm obsessed about at the moment is the mind-blowing evidence coming from arts and health research, which not formally PP, not formally positive psychology, but completely positive psychology stuff. So looking at how the arts sustain human flourishing. I have done some research on that, but very small. I mean, but it's an area that I want to go more into, and I have a project coming up which will be around that. And so, yeah, the arts as this amazing fertile soil for flourishing, and there's so much evidence now, and yeah, I pretty much every week I engage with new research in that area, and I absolutely love it. So I think those two would be the things I would say now, but if you ask me that in a month's time, it would be different.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like there's just so much that really fascinates everyone, I would say.
Mm,
Um, um, and
yeah.
great to see you doing your research within that field.
I would say, Daniel, I definitely recommend everyone to attend positive psychology conferences. I think you would love to go, Daniel, because it sort of opens your horizons to all sorts of fascinating research that people are doing around the world. So many interesting topics. So yeah, if you have interest in that, I'll definitely recommend that you would check out positive psychology conferences. There's a European one coming up actually this summer in Austria, so very close. So yeah, definitely encourage everyone to look at that.
So if someone's listening right now and thinks, I want to know more about this, is there any book or website or paper in particular, one thing you would kind of give them?
Mm. As in a little introduction to positive
Yeah.
psychology. Yeah. Well, I think one good book to have is Marty Seligman's Flourish book. I think that's a nice, accessible book. I know you enjoyed it quite a lot, didn't you, Daniel?
I did, yeah. I've
Yeah,
read it. It's in the RNCM library if you study in Manchester. It's a fantastic book.
yeah. And if you're looking more into reading around musicians' well-being from a positive psychology perspective, um, we wrote a little chapter that is part of the Oxford Handbook of Music Performance. We also have it in the library, and it's a small chapter just giving you some idea of what is positive psychology, what are some of the main well-being models that have been suggested, and what do we know about musicians' well-being from this perspective. So I would encourage you to look that one up as well, and it's a hopefully an easy read. It's also available in the library, also as an ebook, I think. Not 100% sure, but I think we have the ebook for that. So yeah, those two I think would be a good start.
I'm so glad you just mentioned the Flourish book. When I read it, it was my kind of first in-depth contact with the PERMA model, which Martin Seligman describes in there, and he kind of made that the probably most well-known model of well-being in the public. It's called PERMA because it comprises of 5 kind of building blocks. We have positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And if you take the first letters, of course, it makes PERMA. So it's quite memorable. And kind of the nice things about it, it shows us there are a lot of different ways to achieve flourishing. And it doesn't, well, it doesn't say there's that one thing you need to do for well-being. It gives a variety of kind of areas in your life to invest in, and I think it's something a lot of people profit from when they know it. What do you think? What are the strengths of the PERMA model?
Yeah, well, definitely it is a popular model of well-being. And it's given a great contribution in spreading the word about positive psychology. And I think one of the main strengths is that it really highlights that well-being is more than just feeling good. So it's more than just positive emotions. So it suggests a multi-dimensional um, formula for well-being, if you may. So it's a multidimensional model, meaning well-being is presented as a result of different elements. So these 5 elements that you just said. And I think, these sort of categorical models like the PERMA are quite helpful to summarize complex information. So they're very easily applicable. For example, when you want to design an intervention, it's quite practical in that sense. So from a more sort of practical point of view, I think it's great. And despite it being relatively recent, well, broadly speaking, this is already true for PERMA. So both in clinical and non-clinical settings, there are a range of interventions already built upon these 5 pillars that have been shown quite successful. However, I think one of the things that could maybe be improved is, first of all, there's an absence of a clearly articulated theory of flourishing in contrast with other models that we find in the literature that are quite rooted in psychological research. So here the theory is not, well, in my view anyway, so well articulated. And for example, for me, one thing that is still a bit an interrogation is the criteria for well-being are not clear. Are all the factors weighted the same way? What does well mean in relation to the 5 components? How are they articulated with each other? All of that is still, being clarified. And also another thing that I encountered when I was doing some research applying the PERMA was that we still lack a very robust measure for assessment, which basically then prevents this from being refined further. We do have a measure that is available. We're so grateful to use it. but that in itself can still be developed as well. So I think, yeah, these were the things that I would say. But I mean, it represents such a valuable contribution to well-being. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting because in our module we saw a couple of different models of well-being, and PERMA is a great model, and I don't really want to say it's not that sophisticated, but if you compare it to other models, it's quite simple and easily understandable,
Mm,
which I would say is a big strength. So
definitely.
just to recap for the people listening, we have 5 building blocks of the PERMA: positive emotion, engagement, relationship, meaning, and accomplishment. And I find it super helpful when I reflect on my own life, maybe in a diary or just whenever I've got time, to kind of check those areas, because it's kind of, if you just let life happen, you might miss out on one of those areas,
Mm.
and so it's kind of a good checklist.
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned how good it was on a practical level for interventions, but also for personal use. Definitely, I love how you're just now describing how you do that. Yeah, I would definitely encourage people to use it for a personal checkup on their own well-being. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think one element that could be added for kind of personal use is the kind of vitality block. That's all that's got to do with sport and so on. That's also very important for well-being and something to kind of take care of in your everyday life.
Yeah, the physical side of things. Yes, some people have already done that. They added that V to the acronym. Yeah, definitely.
It's definitely not very consistent in the sort of construction if you do that, but as a checklist, I would recommend it.
Mm,
Positive emotion is certainly the most kind of prominent idea of well-being, and a lot of people actually think that well-being is just feeling positive emotions. We saw the PERMA model, and we know there's lots of other elements to it. But to kind of focus on positive emotion, there's always that question of positive emotion and happiness. They're both quite complex constructs, but what we mean by positive emotion is a range of emotions that could be love, gratitude, all those things you can think about. And actually, when I think of my, there's a particular moment this year when I was playing my instrument at my grandma's funeral, and it was obviously a very sad event. But giving giving my music to people and kind of connecting with that was very positive at the same time.
very meaningful,
Um,
yeah.
it was very meaningful, and
Mm,
also I kind of felt the connection with my grandma, with the people,
mm,
the love to music. So
mm,
that was a very nice event, and it kind of led me to think: should I really feel positive emotions all the time?
mm. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that experience, Daniel, because a lot of things that contribute to our well-being don't necessarily feel this upbeat all the time, right? I was just having a recent experience as well when I visited a friend who's very ill. Um, and it's been a few times that I've done this. Every time in the visit, obviously I feel sad, but there's so much um, that is positive about that visit, and there's so much meaning to it, and even awe and other positive emotions. gratitude, serenity, love in that. So as you say, it's very complex. Yeah, I mean, maybe it would be useful to look at first. Do you want to talk a little bit about, what positive emotions actually bring to us in terms of their contribution, and then look at how also we can't expect to be feeling good all the time, because I think it would be good to maybe encourage people to nourish these positive emotions as well in their lives. So when we talk about these positive emotions, we talk about a result of some experience. So these are short-lived and pleasant response tendencies. There's a very inspiring researcher in this field. Her name is Professor Barbara Fredrickson, and she talks about positive emotions as pleasant multi-component response tendencies, because they're not just feelings, they include different dimensions. There's an impact in our nervous system, in our hormones, in our facial expressions, in our thoughts, and so forth. And it's different from just that sensory pleasure and so forth. But what I'm fascinated about is how research has shown the tremendous impact of these emotions and, well, a very large range of outcomes: our physical health, our immunity, our longevity, our experience of pain, our psychological stability even, and our cognitive performance. So for example, we know that this is really, really fascinating, that positive emotions will make us will broaden our minds. They will foster our creativity because they'll make us more flexible to look at solutions with, greater openness to see the bigger picture. Even mild positive emotions, in fact, is quite interesting. It's not so much, well, at least that's what research is showing. It's not so much the intensity of those positive emotions that matters the most, but actually their frequency. So experiencing this regularly, and they are fleeting, so they have an end, and they're short-lived, but they have a lasting impact in our bodies, in our brains, and so forth. And interestingly, we also know that positive emotions help us sort of undo the effects of negative emotions. So Professor Fredrickson talks about this, for example, in terms of your cardiovascular recovery to stress. You will bounce back quicker from a negative situation, stressful situation, if you cultivate positive emotions regularly. For example, there's some research with 9/11 responses. So people's responses to 9/11, the extent to which they experienced positive emotions helped them then return to their normal sort of levels more quickly. Yeah, so I think in terms of your question, in terms of, feeling good all the time, right? You were saying, shall we be feeling upbeat all the time? Was that it, Daniel?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a big danger in this area of work of, with our enthusiasm about positive emotions and positivity. There's this danger for people to think they should always be feeling upbeat and joyful, and it's really important to think that our lives will incite different emotional reactions to different degrees of intensity. And as humans, we are expected to experience a full range of emotions in response to what is happening to us. So if someone expressed they never experienced negative emotions, I would conclude something is quite wrong. I would be very worried about you, Daniel, if you never experienced negative emotions. So we experience a variety of negative emotions. They are triggered by all sorts of events. Sometimes, our day may seem like this emotional roller coaster at times, and negative emotions are an important part of our experience. So it's good to allow ourselves time to notice, to express them, and they play a very important role in our lives. For example, there are researchers that spend their lives studying these things, and then they tell us what they find. We know that narrowing our attention, for example, narrowing our perspective, is one of the immediate effects of negative emotions. So focusing on the source of threat or perceived threat in a stressful situation is very adaptive. And so when we experience negative emotions, there are these action urges. So the body immediately prepares for action. We talk about the fight or flight response, for example, in anxiety situations and so forth. These are very embodied reactions. So our body mobilizes the support for an action that is intended to provide us some safety, to defend us. So in a way, emotions, negative emotions, they are almost like a source of information. They help you understand what's going on around you. They help you recognize threats or perceived threats, shall I say, and prepare positively to handle some sort of threat or perceived threat or danger. So in a way, they are quite protective. Some researchers have also flagged how there can be some positive motivation associated to this experience of a negative emotion. So seeing negative emotions almost like motivators to help us address things in a certain way. But I think one thing to notice is our balance between the two, so between positive and negative emotions. So we know that negative emotions tend to grab our attention much more than positive. And by default, negativity grabs our attention more. So it takes more positive emotions to balance out one negative emotion. There's a bit of an asymmetry here. But interestingly, most people will experience more moments of positivity than negativity in a typical day. So yeah, and then Professor Fredrickson, she talks about a ratio that would be an optimal ratio of this negativity to positivity, and it's something between 3 to 5 positive emotions to 1 negative, but that in itself is quite is debatable as well. But just this idea that it takes definitely more than one positive instance to sort of counterbalance that. But it's a little like a diet, isn't it? It's like, what is your emotional diet? What kinds of moments are you feeding from, and are you nourishing in your day? And so I think that is also a choice we have. We can't escape events that trigger negative emotions, but we can choose to nourish the positivity in our lives in a way that makes us balance that. And I'm really glad that you mentioned, that not all that builds our well-being feels good, which is very important. And a lot of emotions, that we feel that are contextually appropriate will be negative emotions, of course. But yeah, I mean, one thing that I've been struggling with lately is my news consumption. When I watch the news, and obviously there's a whole cocktail of negative emotions that arises there, and it's so important to obviously be informed. Keep being informed about what's going on. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to pay attention to my emotional diet in that circumstance, and to balance out in my day, this experience with other things that I know are sources of positive emotions for me. But yeah, sorry, going back, what was the question, Daniel? I got carried away.
No, no, that's great. I think we talked about if we should feel positive emotions all the time, and you gave a brilliant explanation of kind of what emotions are and what role they should play in our everyday life. So I'm very grateful for you explaining it. And I
There
think
you go.
before
That's a positive emotion right there.
that's a very positive emotion. Yeah. And I think before we come to the more practical application, it reminded me of an experience I had lately. Um, Obviously, I'm a musician, and the thing that usually causes most positive and negative emotions is how I play my instrument. And I was sitting in a rehearsal, and I wasn't doing well. And at some point, your kind of self-talk just changes to bloody hell, just focus and don't do mistakes. And that usually may help you reduce mistakes, but it doesn't usually make you more musical. And so the rehearsal gets a bit tiring. So I came home from that rehearsal, talked to some people, and they were like, yeah, think positively. I'm sure it wasn't that bad, and you didn't do that many mistakes. Could have been much worse. And I was like, it's true, but that doesn't make me feel good. Why does it not
Mm.
help to think positively?
Mm. Yeah. Did you just feel like it was a very vague blanket statement that wasn't really validating your experience? Is that what it felt like?
It didn't really seem authentic, no.
Yeah. You know what? Let me tell you a story that also happened with me recently that sort of answers this. Um, Very recently, I was stuck in a lift in one of the colleges where I work here in London. And it was 7 p.m., well, 6:30-ish p.m. In the evening. You know, I was looking forward to going home, and I hate being stuck in lifts. I think everyone does. And I was stuck with a student as well, so both of us. And funny enough, I had just finished a session on prevention of performance anxiety, and it was a very anxiety-provoking situation. So the lift was this industrial lift, so quite big, which in a way is very, very good. We had lots of space, but the thing is, it didn't even stop. It just went up and down, up and down, up and down, with the alarm ringing, you know. And it was so interesting. The first thing that the facilities guy said to us was, keep calm, keep calm, keep calm, don't panic, don't panic, keep calm. And of course that even triggered more anxiety. And of course we were both anxious because we perceived this threat, right? So everything I can think of at that moment was, okay, it's almost 7 p.m. in London. You know, there's no engineer available at this time of the day. I'm going to be stuck here forever. I'm so hungry. I need to go to the toilet. I don't have enough oxygen in this space, and blah, blah, blah. You know, all kinds of automatic thoughts come to your mind right there. But then what I did, and I'm glad I could practice what I preach. It took me a little bit, but I did do it. I tried to reframe the situation and to look at the evidence. Okay, so what is the evidence? No, it's not a pleasant situation. Yes, I don't enjoy, you know, I'm not going to say, oh, it's such a great situation, or this blanket sort of general statement, you know, keep calm and carry on. What does that even mean? But focusing on the evidence and choosing to look at the good in this situation, and immediately things changed right there. So first of all, we had a big space, so it wasn't like, you know, very confined. We had space to sit down, me and my student. We had Wi-Fi, which was great. And at one point, actually, the alarm stopped and the whole lift stopped halfway between two floors, so we could actually have some quiet. In a conservatoire, it's actually quite rare to have silence. We had silence. So I asked him, you know, what are you playing at the moment? He was talking about his Mozart clarinet concerto. So we were able to listen to some music. I had some food in my bag, and so we were able to have that nice time. And I just asked the facilities person, you know, how long does it take for the engineer to come? And he said it's going to be half an hour, so he's going to be here in half an hour. So I said, okay, we have half an hour of a quiet space with Wi-Fi and with food. And that's just a fact. Like, that's so I chose to focus on that. Now, is it an amazing situation? No, it's not, but there is goodness in it. It was a very spacious lift, which I was very grateful for, you know, so we didn't have that feeling of not being able to move or anything. It's quite big. We had Wi-Fi, we had food, we had music. So all of a sudden, and we had a deadline for the end of this. So we had, you know, it happened that he actually came a little earlier, which is lovely. But yeah, so this idea of positive reframing of the situation needs to be realistic, evidence-based, and it needs to be, you know, linked to the specifics of the situation, not just a general state of it. And of course, I'm very sure that the intentions of people who say these things are very good, so they want to help us. But, you know, what you could do in that situation, for example, is to see, okay, of everything that happened, what did I learn about myself as a musician? What did I learn about my preparation? What was actually positive within it? Maybe, I don't know, in 30 minutes of music, maybe 10 minutes were actually quite well done and you felt like you were achieving. Maybe if all of it was not up to the standard that you wanted to, you can learn a lot about why that was, and that this will prepare you better for the next situation. Maybe the consequence of this wasn't as as impactful as it could have been. It could have been a high profile concert or whatever. So just trying to notice all of that. Do you see anything now with more time to reflect on it? Do you see anything positive in that situation now?
I think, I mean, definitely, we we sometimes say that you only learn from mistakes, which isn't true in general.
Yeah.
But mistakes are a great opportunity to learn, definitely, because
Mm,
especially if you're in a bit of a pressure situation, you you're kind of forced to your more core thinking and performance, and it's kind of good to analyze what's working well,
mm.
and what's reliable and what maybe needs more practice.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so
definitely.
that was, I mean, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I would definitely encourage you to have well, if you don't have it yet, because I think we talked a lot about this in the module, to have both a practice diary but also a performance diary where we can reflect on, and even rehearsals, group rehearsals, where you can reflect on what did I learn about myself as a musician here, about my preparation, but also about myself in performance mode, because sometimes we don't practice in performance mode, and then all of a sudden when we are in performance mode we get some surprises. And so it's always great to just reflect and be more aware of that, because that will definitely help you get ready for the next one.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Thank you. Um, and I think another um, truth that can be helpful, not always, but not everything in life goes well, and there are rehearsals that just don't go well. And if you kind of know that it's not dramatic, it also kind of relaxes the situation a bit.
Mm, yeah,
And
definitely.
also the musicians you work with, if you're if you're struggling every now and then, no one's gonna think you're a bad musician.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and also this expectation that that a good musician has to nail it all the time. I mean, where does that come from, right? We looked a little bit at some interviews with musicians in our module, didn't we? And it's quite interesting. One of the quotes that stuck in my mind was um, one of the musicians from a very, very high profile orchestra saying, the best lawyer will miss will lose some cases. They will still be an amazing lawyer, and a musician needs to allow themselves to have you know not so good rehearsals or not so good concerts, and that doesn't say anything about their artistic potential. So yeah, I would definitely encourage us to be more forgiving of ourselves when we have less less good moments as performers and as musicians, definitely.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think we could keep talking about performance experiences forever. There's just so much to say about it. Um, I think coming back to the positive emotions, the one point that's, I think, good to come back is that idea of regulating emotions.
Mm,
And it seems a bit unnatural at first, because there's kind of that idea of emotions just come over us. But if you think about it, I don't think it's really true, because we already regulate emotions in our life. That's something you'll learn
mm,
as a human being, even if it's just you're not feeling well, and then you choose to do something different, you listen to your favorite music.
Mm-hmm.
That's all kind of that strategy of regulating emotions. On a more sophisticated research level, how does regulating emotion work, and how can we do it?
Mm. Yeah, I'm grateful that you're mentioning this because there's so much we can do to nourish these emotional states, right? And as we saw earlier, it's crucial for our well-being the way we balance our negative emotional experiences with the positive ones, making sure that the positivity greatly outnumbers negativity. I think the first thing to do is to actually be aware. So you mentioned that, you know, we all tend to regulate, but some people are much more aware of that than others. So I would encourage everyone to do a little bit of an X-ray of our own practices in this area and how aware we are of our emotional diet, our action tendencies, and so forth. What am I feeling? How do I usually feel in these circumstances? How do I react? So knowing ourselves, we very rarely stop to think and pay close attention to what we are feeling, I think, and yeah, to consider the impact it has on our mental and physiological states and the long-term implications of holding on to emotions as well. So I think it's important to notice. So notice my tendencies, notice the things that I know make me feel good. And I think there is this trend now. It's very trendy to talk about mindfulness practices, right? So being in the moment, being aware, which is very important. But one thing that I wanted to say, it's really important, of course, being aware of what you're feeling, being in that present moment. But we can change the present moment. We don't need to stay there. So there are states or emotions that are worth cultivating, that hold so much value in terms of our health, our ability to be at our best, to contribute to others, going back to that definition of health you brought earlier of the World Health Organization. So yes, being aware, but then also knowing what I want to nourish, and that might be different from what I am feeling right now. So we don't need to stay in that state necessarily. I'm aware of my emotions. I accept what is, of course, but it doesn't have to be it. I can nourish new states. So it's worth striving for positive emotions. I think going back to what I was saying about the news consumption, I think one thing to regulate emotions is this. I gave that example. It's interesting that during the pandemic, we were talking a lot about this, weren't we? About our exposure to negativity or to negative news and information. Even the World Health Organization, interestingly, recommended limiting our engagement with information about the pandemic at the time. And it's interesting. So it's just knowing what are some things that are, leading me to negative emotions. And there are, of course, things that are important we experience that as part of being human, but being careful and paying attention, again, going back to that idea of my emotional diet. So knowing how and when should I be balancing these. So things, practical things. Doing mindful pauses in our day is something that works quite well. So focusing on what you're doing and not allowing worry about the future and uncertainty to start dominating. So just small mindful pauses and practicing focusing on a very short amount of time. So for example, what do I need to take care of today? What do I need to take care of in the next hour? When I start to feel a bit overwhelmed, I find that it helps me to say, okay, this is what I need to do in the next half an hour, and then I'll worry about the next half an hour and the next, instead of having this, massive overload of future worry. And as we slow down, we can also make sure that we appreciate our moments of joy and contentment, no matter how small. So, just noticing and savoring the present moment without rushing all the time. And we're giving our brain a chance to process them better. We're boosting our feel-good neurotransmitters, and we're helping elevate our mood. So simple things, having a chat, when you're having a chat in the cafeteria with your colleague, are you looking at your phone at the same time? Are you thinking about what you need to practice in the next hour? Or are you taking those 2 minutes or 3 minutes, whatever it may be, to sort of enjoy and savor that one moment? I remember I did a workshop once on savoring. I don't know if I share this with you guys in the module.
No, no,
It
don't
was
think so.
quite annoying initially, but then it was so powerful, and I still remember it to this day. So I was given a strawberry. It was, unfortunately, it was just before lunchtime, so I was so hungry. We were all given a strawberry, and we were guided to notice that strawberry for 10 minutes. And I was just so hungry. I was salivating, and, we were guided to notice the texture and the smell and the color and this and that and that. And then we were guided when we were allowed to eat it, which took a long time, but once we were allowed to eat it, we were also guided into how to savor it. And I can tell you, it was the absolute best strawberry of my life, but also, it made a point, which is, are we really noticing those small things, on our day to day? So I think, yeah, that's the first encouragement, to savor the little things, and notice them. Another thing is that we know, helps and has a big impact on our emotional well-being is prioritizing our basic self-care. So our self-care routines, it's really important to make sure that we prioritize them. So this includes obviously eating healthy meals, staying hydrated, exercising regularly, getting good rest. Um, so making sure you control your caffeine intake, if that's something important as well for you, making sure you create a restful environment for sleep and so forth. So that is one of the sort of bases of then your emotional health as well. And another thing that I would definitely encourage everyone to think about as well is that um, the positive emotions that we experience with other people seem to be especially powerful in terms of our health. It's almost like a superfood in the diet. So sharing moments of positive emotions with others is very, very powerful. So looking at connection with others, looking at relationships, nurturing our relationships, and intentionally showing kindness and so forth, and prioritizing other people and those moments of connection is quite important as well. I know you mentioned gratitude earlier, right? I was going to mention that too as one of the big ways to foster this positivity, but maybe you want to share a bit about that, Daniel.
Yeah, you just attempted to steal my transition because I
Oh,
was
so
coming to.
that's a good thing.
No, no, I was coming to my kind of highlight of the conversation because I wanted to zoom in on a particular positive emotion,
Mm,
and I wanted to share a moment of gratitude I had on Sunday. It was the last Christmas concert I had, and I recently decided to leave the brass band I was playing in to play in a new one, mainly because the old one was very good and the new one is even better, and so that kind of last concert was I was so grateful for it because I played with the old band for 1.5 years, and we're all still friends, of course. I was playing a solo. A lot of people on the Christmas and I just love Christmas concerts because
Me
everyone is
too.
there
Yeah.
feeling the great atmosphere, um, and so on. So gratitude is really, really powerful for me.
Mm,
And I think it's an emotion that's quite easily trained.
mm,
So I I have a diary, and I have my little gratitude section where I just write down stuff I'm grateful for. And the interesting thing is, the more you do it, the easier it gets,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's just the way of thinking that you practice, and you can come back to it quite easily
Mm,
once you do it regularly. Um,
yeah.
so you probably also wanted to talk about gratitude. Do you have a special positive emotion moment?
Oh yeah, well, I love what you're saying about gratitude because I feel the same. It takes a while, but then once you start being very intentional about it, it comes naturally to us, doesn't it? And it gets easier and easier, and then all of a sudden you're seeing so many good things in your day, like, oh, good things are happening more often. But no, they were always there. We just didn't really notice them. Yeah, I mean, well, one thing that happened, well, I can tell you about a very recent one. Uh, yeah, a couple of nights ago, I was on a taxi at night, and there was a bit of an awkward silence going on. So I just asked, so how was your day? And he starts going, oh, it was horrible. My day was so bad. Someone broke my window, the taxi window, and I had to fix it in the morning, and I lost so many clients. It was horrible, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, I just asked if anything was stolen. I said, so did they steal anything? Did someone just break in, or was it just an accident? And he started noticing how nothing was stolen. In fact, he even had money on the one of the compartments, like the car thing. He had money there, and nobody had taken it. He opened it and he checked. It's like, oh, actually, no, my money's still here. So he hadn't noticed, first of all, that the car is intact. Nothing was stolen. The window was now fully repaired, so it was a couple of hours. And so I just deconstructed with him the goodness of that situation. In fact, it was quite surprising that nothing nothing had been stolen. But yeah, all of it was pretty much there and protected. And he's like, wow, I never thought of that. Oh, I'm so grateful. And I said, interesting. So yeah, so I think this intention to notice the goodness, right? Is quite important, and there's a large number of fascinating studies now highlighting how this regular practice of appreciating the goodness in our lives can be such a game changer when it comes to improving our well-being. And I love how you say that you write things down. I tend to do that too. Writing down in a journal is a good way to do it, a gratitude diary, but also writing gratitude letters or emails to people, or just reflecting. There are all sorts of ways of doing this, but just the decision to focus on the good on a moment by moment basis, to decide to notice these things is great.
Fantastic. Yeah. It's a kind of one common misunderstanding about it is that it's not authentic when we kind of force it. If you think that, I would just encourage you to try it out, because one thing that I notice is it's very authentic, because you're not forcing emotion. I mean, you can't. You're not telling yourself life is really bad, but I just decide to take it positively. But because there's so much positive things happening, just the decision to focus on that and to practice that way of thinking and regulating emotion is so powerful.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, going back to physical health, right? Sometimes it doesn't seem very authentic for me to get out of the house and go to the gym, but I know it's good for me, and I know it will contribute to my well-being. And sometimes all I want is to eat chocolate all the time. That's not necessarily good for me. So just like we train our healthy diet, we train our bodily engagement with exercise, we can train our emotions, we can train our emotional diet, and we can make efforts to make it a little more healthy, and then hopefully it will become a routine.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Um, that was a lovely conversation about the positive emotions. And just to come back to the overall well-being, which kind of the sports, I think, did. we're in winter now. The shortest day is past at least, so it's getting better. But I feel at least winter can be quite challenging. It's dark and cold. You don't go out with your friends that often. I mean, you're from Portugal, so I guess it feels even colder for you, doesn't it? Uh,
Definitely, yeah.
what do you do for your well-being in the winter
Mm.
time?
Yeah, it definitely feels colder. And also, it's a time of a lot of train strikes, which for me is a big, big challenge because I commute to Manchester quite often. So the winter brings both of these challenges. Um, yeah, so I think one thing that helps me a lot is to play the piano. So I've been doing it a lot more in the winter because obviously, as you say, we tend to stay indoors a little more. And it always works to make me feel good. Just playing and obviously listening to music, but playing the piano especially. And interestingly, I was a little worried about my neighbors, but they love it and they call me asking for specific songs for specific tracks now. So it's this interesting dynamics. Um, I also here in London, I live near a big park, and so while it's still while we'll still have light, I like to go for walks and to just spend time there. And I I have a nice camera that it was a bit of a nice gift a few years ago, and I like to just sometimes just take the camera, take photos, just noticing things. That helps me quite a lot. Um, and another thing I absolutely love, especially in this time of the year, is to have a warm drink in a local coffee shop. I love some of the coffee shops around here, really, really lovely places to be, and especially if you bring people with you. But just having a warm drink in a coffee shop always makes me happy. Also, if I'm stuck in my work, if I don't feel particularly creative and I'm a bit down, I just go for an hour of work in the coffee shop, and all of a sudden, I just feel so much better. And in extreme cases, I always fly to Portugal for a weekend. So that's always an option as well.
Thank you so much for sharing this. That's very helpful. And I just think that it's very individual what you want to do in the winter time. So just do what's good for you. I think for most of us, we're music students, music can definitely help a lot. Um,
Yeah,
and
and I was just going to say, make sure you are connecting as well. Connecting to other people is very, very important. So that we're not isolating.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Um, I think that's kind of a good end to the conversation we had. We talked about kind of conceptions of health and mental health. We came to the PERMA model of well-being, and we zoomed in on positive emotions. And to kind of wrap up, I think would be great to go back to the Bruch pieces you brought us at the beginning. Is
Mhm.
there one movement in particular you associate with positive emotions?
Definitely. Number seven. I associate all of them with positive emotions, I must say. But especially number seven is quite joyful. And I would definitely want to listen to that right now.
Fantastic. So, thank you so much for your time. And yet, let's listen to number 7 of the Bruch pieces.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Wow, what a great conversation. I hope you found it as insightful as I did. I learned a lot, definitely. Now, this podcast is aimed to be around an hour long, and because we're already quite over length, I'll keep my part to this now short. But something I quite like to share with you are my own well-being experiences. Now, when we recorded the interview, it was quite a few weeks ago, and we were still very stuck in winter. And especially if you're not from the north of England or something, you find winter here quite depressing with all the clouds. You just don't get sunlight. And now, as this is getting published, we had a couple of days where it was nice and sunny, and something I find really helpful is just to go outside on walks. Just helps getting the head free and have different thoughts and relax. It's just something I would recommend to everyone. And if I'm being honest, the last couple of weeks were quite stressful and challenging for me. There was just a lot of stuff happening, lots of deadlines, lots of music I had to practice and play, and it got me a bit overwhelmed. Over the last couple of days now, I've been able to I've been able to get back into a more relaxed, structured way of planning my day. And what I found really useful is to focus on the basics. And with basics, I mean basics like keeping your room tidy, having good food, having good sleep and rest. That's very helpful. Taking time to relax. Those are the basics, but it's pretty hard to achieve, if we're being honest. And those were kind of the best experiences I've made in the last couple of weeks. Being out in the sun, the feeling of cleaning my room, the feeling of cooking a nice meal, the feeling of just talking to friends. Yeah, that's what I found really useful. So just before we end, I would like to ask for your support and help, because this is the first ever podcast I recorded. It's a big step out of my comfort zone, and I'd love to hear your feedback on it. I'm not in any way trained to speak on recordings, and I might have a lot of errors, that sort of stuff in my speech. Also, if you find some bits spoken too fast or not clearly enough, let me know. Let me know about the structure of the podcast, about potential topics you'd like to have covered. And of course, please share this podcast with anyone you think who would find it useful. It just helps me reach the people I want to reach, and people who might benefit from this. Just before we end, let me recap on this first episode of Well Tempered. I introduced myself and the podcast, and then we had a first very long and insightful interview with the fantastic Sara Ascenso, where she talked about well-being, health, the PERMA model, and positive emotions. And something that really stuck with me is the term emotional diet. That's something, I'm reflecting on in my own life, what emotions come in, how's the balance. And so as you go into your life, and maybe especially for the music students who have a couple of free weeks now, check in with yourself, check in with the categories of the PERMA model and see what is going well, where could I improve. And most of the times we already know what's helpful for us, but also some of the tips we mentioned in the interview. Thank you all for listening until now. I hope you found this helpful and enjoyable, and I hope to see you next time.